Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma 221 here, back today to talk about Kagurabachi, chapter number 61. This chapter is titled Night Battle. And honestly, I do not know if it's just me, but I feel like the Kagurabachi chapter titles aren't the best chapter titles I've ever read out of any manga ever. They sort of seem just like mediocre half time because nowhere in this chapter is there any talk of a night battle actually happening. If anything, what we get is more of a discussion about a non-battle that should hopefully be coming up between, of course, our hero and the group, of course, with Chihiro and Masumi. And later in this chapter, we meet two new Hishaku members. I'll just go ahead and put that out there. It's pretty neat. I mean, if you're watching this video, you probably are either willing to get spoiled or have already read this chapter of Kagurabachi, so it's not like really a hidden secret that, oh my gosh, guys, we got two new Hishaku members revealed at the end of this chapter. But really, the two of them don't really talk about a night battle either. The two of them just sort of talk about, like, hey, we have a mission, and here's what the mission is. Like, there's no talks like, okay, we know that Chihiro, Rokuhiro, and all of his gang are going to be here, we're going to duke it out. Really, none of that gets brought up whatsoever, so I find it a little funny that this chapter is titled Night Battle to begin with. And then the other question is, okay, if it is truly night outside and Samura's owl ability, of course, coming from the Tobimune Enchanted Blade, if the owl ability truly coats the world in this, like, darkness, what is the mechanisms of all of this? Because later in this chapter, we get a very nice shot of a, city skyline whenever we get introduced to Kyoto, as we will get introduced to in this chapter. And in this image, like, we not only see the owl face in the sky, and the entire sky just being completely black, but we also see some clouds in the distance, which really opens up a few questions here. Like, okay, is the owl face itself etched into the sky, or is it sort of like the opposite, to where on top of it being like an endless layer of night, there's a holes in this sort of nightshade, and that's where sunlight's able to come through, and this sunlight makes the face of this owl? Or is it just like, okay, here is this endless night sort of thing, and here's this owl face implant on it, but does, like, the sun able just, like, to come through and, like, just phase through this barrier and touch the ground? Like, what is the mechanism of this? Because it still seems like everybody is able to sort of see pretty fine, even though, like, it is just, like, dark outside constantly, and of course lights up this, but, like, do all the lights in Kyoto light up the area so this, so the clouds are, like, illuminated in the sky? Like, I'm super interested in how the mechanism of the owl actually works, because we understand what its ability is. It is made to go through and say, okay, hey, I'm detecting something over a certain range, like, we understand that much, but what we don't understand is how does this affect sunlight getting through? Like, is it just truly nighttime outside, and the owl just, like, amplifies that and just, like, darkens everything around? Like, how does this owl work? I really, really, really want to know. But all of that tangent aside, this is a pretty good chapter of Kagurabachi, I think. I know I said that about most of them, but last chapter was sort of like, yeah, it's good, it's not amazing, but it's very interesting, all things considered. And this one is much more of a, okay, I like this because this is really the first chapter of the next arc in Kagurabachi. Of course, as far as the story is concerned itself, we are still on the Sword Bear assassination arc, because we have not gotten one of these things that says, like, hey, here's the next part of the story, which is fine, but really we're going on to the Samura's daughter arc, as we will be getting into further into this chapter. I know I'm spoiling everything super early, but I guess it is what it is. Like I said, if you are waiting for me to divulge everything about this chapter, I'm sorry, I don't normally do it this way, but yeah, this is a very good chapter of Kagurabachi, and I really like a lot of the elements that are put into this chapter, and especially seeing everything as we will be getting into. I really have nothing else to say before we hop into this chapter this week, so with that, let's talk about what happened last time in Kagurabachi. And of course, last time, as I was mentioning, we had a sort of, like, okay chapter. It wasn't the best chapter of Kagurabachi yet, but it was still very interesting as a mechanism of a chapter, because, hey, Chihiro had supposedly died. His heart completely stopped after the Battle of Samura, and of course, Chihiro came back to life in this moment. And it was pretty much a conversation of Shiba and Chihiro talking about this mechanism, and then the mini Samura, of course the leader of the Masumi, walked in a room and pretty much just said, like, hey, your friend Hakuri saved us, and we are now sort of in debt to him, and he asked us to protect you, so we are now your silent ninja squad as all of this goes on, Chihiro. I hope you enjoy us. And then the other part of the chapter was this whole idea of, okay, oh my gosh, why can I not remember a name? I've got a whole reference card in front of me. The Kabunabi, they pretty much had a whole talk with all of the various leaders of the organization, and we're just saying, hey, here's all this is going on. Of course, we still have the Magutsumi, or what they call the Shinichi blade. In case any of you guys did not know this, it is the blade is called the Magutsumi, but Shinichi in Japanese sort of means like the peak or the pinnacle of something, and because it's the strongest blade, that's why the Kabunagi call it the Shinichi, because like it is the peak of all of the enchanted blades, but it is just known as the Magutsumi, as that's the name of the enchanted blade, just like Cloud Gouger or Koregumo as it's called, or Kumeyori, Tobimune, or Inten, or any of these other blades that we will get introduced, because we have 2 more we don't know about yet, which is very, very fascinating. Honestly, I don't know if we're going to get the reveal of the last enchanted blade until probably about chapter 100. I think that'd be a nice place to sort of like round out chapter 100 of, oh, here is the last enchanted blade, and just figuring out where it goes from there. But yeah, it is something that's not really that important. But yes, what was happening last time, they were having a discussion on, hey, here's what we were doing with this enchanted blade, and they talked about potentially having a sneak attack happen to Samura. And of course, from there, we learned what Chihiro's group's goal is they simply just want to go and talk to Samura. And as you'll be getting into this chapter, we have a new way of leverage that they're going to be able to be doing that. So hopping into this chapter of Kagurabachi itself, in chapter number 61, we open up on a really, really cool title page. So Kagurabachi normally doesn't do color pages, so I was really excited whenever I opened up this chapter. I'm like, oh wow, this is a color page, or not a color page, or a cover page, and on top of it, it looks really, really cool, because what we see here is an image of 3 of the important enchanted blades right now. We have, of course, the Tobimune, Kumeyori, and Inten. If you're looking at this page, we see that, of course, Kumeyori is the one who sort of has, like, this, ethereal, like, sort of warping shape, if I was going to call it. It's the one that has the hilt facing down in the image. Of course, Inten is, like, the, watery, like, hilt on it. And then, we see that Tobimune is the one facing down in this image, and it has this really, I don't even know what to call it, but this very interesting split guard, all things considered. But yeah, we just get a card page of the 3 enchanted blades here, and I think it does look very, very cool, and I really, really just love how this how this cover page is drawn out. Just really do enjoy it. So as we go into the chapter proper, of course, last thing we saw was, of course, Chihiro and all of the Masumi members coming up the elevator into the Kabunagi headquarters. And this chapter, we don't start there at all, but we start, of course, with those same 4 characters, of course, Chihiro, Kuhira, and all of the other Masumi members, who, of course, if you are new to the channel here, who I've been calling...
Hey guys, post-production Glowplasma 231 here, and I quickly want to say this video was recorded on December 31st of 2024, and the day of editing this, it is 10 days later on January 10th of 2025. And during this time, we've had official names come out for the Masumi members finally. I know it's been a very, very long time to not have their names, and you'd think like they'd get introduced in like this chapter, but that's not how the author wanted to do it. But just so you guys know that from going on forward in the next few videos, I will be using their official names. But for now, we're going to just be sticking with Violet, Scarlet, and Mini Samura before we get into the new names, which honestly I don't even know them yet since I've not read those chapters of Kagurabachi. But I just wanted to put this like quick little PSA in here of like, hey, we do have official names now. Go check out the Kagurabachi wiki or wherever else you get that information from. But they're now official names. This is going to be the last video with these temporary names till we get some. Have a good one. I'll see you in the video.
Mini Samura, Scarlet, and Violet, respectively. Scarlet is the more bigger, brutish guy, and Violet is the woman of the group. And Mini Samura is the Mini Samura character. There is no other way to describe this at all. As we see that they are dining in at a cafe, and it is November 13th at 11:20 a.m. So this is very quickly after fact, as Chihiro's just woken up, gotten the Masumi with him, and now they're going out on their plan of attack almost immediately. And as the time frame suggests, this is about, let me do my math here, it's about 8 hours after we saw the Kabunagi talking in the last chapter. So we see pretty much, as the main gag of the chapter, the one that I really enjoy, we see that Chihiro is sitting here at the table, and as he goes, he turns his head one way, and next thing you know, there's a spoon in his mouth. He turns his head the other way, and one of the other Masumi members has a little tablecloth and wipes off his mouth. And he then goes and grabs his drink cup and starts to bring it up to his face, but as he does it, there's water being poured into his glass, and Chihiro has the sort of reaction of like, come on, you guys are too overprotective here. It's the same thing that Samura was saying whenever we saw that little bit of a flashback including all of them. And I love how they're doing it to Chihiro also, like, after Samura told him, like, hey, I'm not gonna make you guys do this. I really love how it's like, okay, now they're doing it to Chihiro, and Chihiro needs to be the one to tell them, like, hey, guys, you guys need to stop all of this, right? And Mini Samura just says, like, oh, this is just how we operate. For the time being, you're the Masumi's new master, right? And Mini Samura just also says, like, hey, your wounds aren't completely healed, and Chihiro's like, but bro, man, like, I can feed myself, though. Like, my arm being, like, slightly hurt, or, like, having, like, a bug bite on my arm doesn't mean, like, I can go through and just, like, not pick up my water and, like, eat my food. As we see the sort of, like, a cuisine dish in front of him, and I honestly don't know what to make of this dish. Honestly, I don't know what half of this is because I don't know Japanese. It looks like, I said, like, I don't know Japanese, like, I don't know Japanese cuisine, not like I don't know the Japanese language, because I do know a little bit of that, but I do not know Japanese cuisine. But we see, like, there's a fried egg on top of something here. We see some, like, pudding sort of deal. It looks like some noodles and some rice on the plate, too. Like, just looks like a very assorted thing on this plate here, which is very interesting, right? But, of course, too, this one Chihiro's like, hey, I can feed myself, guys. We see that Mini Samura's just like, hey. I mean, that is a good sign, all things considered, right? As we see that Mini Samura just is like, hey, have you guys heard anything about Aruha? And Chihiro just says, like, no, not yet. And Mini Samura just says, like, okay, well, I get where forensics is coming from. They've never had a specimen with an enchanted blade sword contract of 18 years. Which makes me interested because how many hands did these enchanted blades actually pass through in the war? Because the way that Mini Samura says it here is that, okay, guys, I get where forensics it's coming from. They've never had an enchanted blade holder that held the blade for that long, which does make sense being that, like, after the war, or was it 3 years after war, if I'm not mistaken, that's when Kunishige was killed very tragically in that moment. And of course, Misako was killed during that time too, and we really don't know much about the Seitei War, like how long it took or any of these variable, like, things, but we know that Misaka at least had the blade for what we can at least gather to be at least 4 years if she got the blade in the last year of the war, but from what I figure, she had the blade a lot longer before that, of course, that being Cloud Gouger itself. And then Kumayori Yoji had it, or Aruha had it, Tobi Mune is in Samura's possession, and then the other two blades are in these other two characters' possession. But during the war, like, how many times did these blades end up swapping hands? It sort of reminds me of the whole idea of, like, okay, how many times did people have One for All before Deku actually got a hold of it, right? Like, how many hands did it have to pass through during all of these catastrophes for the final user to actually get it? And, of course, we know Aruha's case, not have it anymore. So, I really find it interesting is if we're going to learn more about these other Enchanted Blade users, or, like, has Samura just always had a Tobi Mune, and he's, like, the only enchanter of it. Like, we just don't know a lot of these little things. As we see that Scarlet just is like, yeah, we all get where you're coming from, but we just mainly care if Aruha is dead or not, right? And Mini Samura just is like, yeah, that's a good point. Like the blonde dude said, it's better not to get our hopes up. Of course, referring to Mr. Shiba after that whole thing that he, that when Mini Samura walked in Chihiro and Mr. Shiba talking last chapter. But this really does make a lot of sense because it sort of seems like, okay, there seems like there may be a hope that Aruha isn't dead, which really the whole idea is like, okay, we're not getting our hopes up, but also knowing and reading enough manga, it definitely seems like it would not be getting hammered as hard in our head if Aruha wasn't alive in some capacity, right? So I feel like at some point we are going to be getting a sort of return of Aruha, even though I don't think that it is going to happen for a while. And even still, this is what, 3 days after Aruha has already been dead, and then Chihiro has suddenly woken up. There's just a lot of uncertainty here that we just don't really have the particular answer for, right? But pretty much what happens next is, Mini Samura's like, okay guys, let's take stock of the general situation around here. Right now, the Kabunagi, Hishaku, and Samura are in a 3-way deadlock. Of course, bringing this idea up of a deadlock that we have gotten plenty of times in Kagurabachi so far. Mini Samura just continues like, hey, the leadership sent us to take some kind of preemptive action, But while you were resting, Chihiro, we scoured the landscape and found no possible trace of the Hishaku. It's like that wild rampage 3 days ago never even happened. And Scarlet just makes the obvious point of like, hey guys, I mean, if the Hishaku's been flying under the radar for 4 possible years, it would not make sense if we could just track them down in 2 whole days, right? And then Scarlet looks over to Chihiro and just says like, hey, all of that information you actually got out of that one Hishaku the other day was actually massive for us in the Kabunagi, being that we did not know a lot of that. And Chihiro just says, like, yeah, Hirohiko was a real big talker, of course. Being that, yeah, who else would they be talking about than Hirohiko, right? Scarlet just says, like, hey, Mr. Samura, on the other hand, left us a hell of a paper trail, even in broad daylight. As we get to joke, is like, okay, the contrasting nighttime outside as we see Owl's face just, like, sinking in through the sky. Which does really lend a little bit to my point of, okay, if he sort of means that a bit more literally, maybe the sunlight is just coming through the owl's, the face of the owl in this case, but really, we don't know anything about that. As Scarlet just says, like, hey, so if we trace that spirit energy, we'll find his source location. The leaders think it's an enchanted blade detector, reiterating some stuff we already knew. He then says to Chihiro, like, hey, and if you end up drawing Inten, Mr. Samura will probably immediately know where you are and then come and try to kill you, right? As Mini Samura just says, like, hey, in other words, we can't fight Mr. Samura anytime we want. We are the Kabunagi's best Samura counteract force, right? Or the best counter Samura force, as he actually phrases it, right? Personally, we want to knock some sense into him as soon as possible, and the Kabunagi want to eliminate the threat of Mr. Samura ASAP too. On the other hand, only Mr. Samura can put pressure onto the Hishaku, right? And Scarlet just says, like, hey, mainly because innocent bystanders could be harmed, and Violet just says, like, hey, and right now, last thing we want is for the Hishaku to force our hand, right? If we launch into battle with Mr. Samura without intel on the Hishaku, that could be a total disaster, right? And then there's this little moment where everybody's just pausing, sitting here, as they're like, okay, wait a second, what if we just, like, draw out the Enchanted Blade now and just have Samura come to us? But Mini Samura just says, like, hey, don't draw your Enchanted Sword, Chihiro. And Chihiro obviously asks, okay, well, if I'm not going to do that, do we at least have a plan for what we're doing here? As Mini Samura just says, like, okay, there actually is. We have some leverage in this situation. As we suddenly cut into the Kabunagi headquarters, where it seems like a few of the members are in more of a library or records room. As we mainly see we can only see the face of the Sideburns leader here, and we get an image of presumably another of the members. From the back of the head, it just really looks like Izami, I guess, but we don't really have a grand idea for who this character actually is. As we see this character just as like, oh, a hostage? And Sideburns just says like, oh, yes, is what you might call the only clink in Samura's armor. His daughter. As he says like, hey, we could have had Samura in the palm of our hands, but... And the other character just says like, oh, but what are you talking about? As Sideburns just says like, hey, look at this. Unfortunately, just over 2 years ago, as we see the paper that he's pointing to has a date of April 16th and the cause of death for this specific person as acute heart failure, being a chronic condition of heart disease. And at this point, we cut back into this cafe where Chihiro and Masumi are, as, of course, this has just been explained to Chihiro in this time where we also sort of cut away. It's a really neat way of doing it. I like whenever manga like cut the scene like this and is showing some actual facts, and as we'll get to, there's more to this than actually meets the eye. Chihiro's like, okay, so Mr. Samura had a daughter, and I think this is Mini Samura who says this, but we don't really understand. This is like, hey, I mentioned that we paid a visit to Mr. Samura's family, right? He and his wife divorced a long time ago and were living apart. And Chihiro's like, okay, well, I don't get where you're going if his daughter is dead now, right? But Mini Samura just says like, hey, When I heard he killed you once, it occurred to me that for Mr. Samura, death is how he distances himself from people he cares about. Showing that, yeah, the reason that he killed Chihiro that time is mainly because he cared about him and he was Rokuhiro's son, and just didn't want him to go down this more evil path, if that's the way we're going to phrase it, right? As Scarlet's just like, hey, wait, are you actually suggesting? And Chihira's like, okay, back up. What are you guys actually talking about? As Scarlet just says, like, hey, during our service to Mr. Samura, he only used us once as ninja. And that was to, as Violet just breaks out and just says, to fake her death. And Chihiro is sort of taken aback like this, but oh, wait a second, right? As Violet just continues saying, like, hey, 3 years ago, the Kabunagi put the contracted swordbearer's family under protection and surveillance, restricting their activities for their own safety. And Mr. Samura hated that his daughter had to endure that because of him. And she says, hey, I guess he anticipated this might happen at some point. He didn't want the Kabunagi to use him against her. And she was like, hey, what do you mean? And Mini Samura just says, like, hey, Mr. Samura's daughter is currently living under a secret identity. And she was like, okay, but using a relative as a hostage, isn't that a bit much? But Mini Sarama just says, like, hey, don't worry, we would actually never do that. We have no intention of bringing her into any sort of fight. That is not the crucial part about it at all. And just says, like, hey, do you really think, the Hishaku intend to obediently battle Mr. Samura after he fulfills their agreement? That personal killing machine they have right now? And just says, like, hey, that would be a suicide for them. So naturally, they've got something up their sleeve to protect themselves, right? And Samura only has one weakness. And Scarlet just is like, that's right. She is their leverage, but it's impossible currently because she is completely undetectable. Between the convenient timing and little inconsistencies with the fake body and medical records, they might have actually caught on that she is still alive. And Violet then just cuts in saying, like, hey, but even so, there is no way they could track her down, not with the spell that was actually cast on her. That spell makes it personally impossible for other people to recognize her as Seiichi Samura's daughter. She wouldn't even recognize that she's his daughter, even if she actually met him. It was the price that Samura had to pay to ensure her freedom and safety, and to sever the memory of their connection to each other. And she says, hey, that is what I mean by undetectable. And just continuing on with all this sort of information about Samura's daughter, Mini Samura just says, like, hey, but the Hishaku succeeded in assassinating Kunishige Rokuhira, and they also undid the seal on the Shinuchi in just 3 years. We can't afford to underestimate their powers as sorcerers. And Chihiro's like, okay, so is there a way that you can actually determine if the spell that was cast on her is still intact? And being that Violet is the one who actually casted this spell, she says, like, hey, if something changes in the spell, I can actually detect it, and so far there hasn't been an issue whatsoever. And Violet just says, like, hey, but in the worst case scenario, it might be a good idea to check it out. And Mini Samura just says, like, hey, if the Hishaku is putting hopes of defeating Samura on her, taking her into custody would serve as a check against both Samura and the Hishaku. And hearing all of this, Chihiro just says, okay then, where is she? As we cut to a full page spread, where we, of course, like I mentioned earlier, we see the site of Kyoto, as this is the next area that everybody's heading in the Kagurabachi world. And I just really like whenever we get these pages of a new location. I mean, we've gotten a few of these, mainly with Tokyo, whenever we first saw that Chihiro went to Tokyo, and then, of course, during the Rakuzachi, just like, hey, the Rakuzachi, the auction house, pretty much. And now we have one for Kyoto, and I just really love how this image is drawn with the massive construction going on top of a building, and of course, Samura's owl in the background. This is just a very cool design, all things considered. Well, at this point, we cut the scene into a grocery store where we see some guy is looking down at some produce and is reaching his hand down. And as he reaches his hand down, we see that a certain flame-like symbol is drawn on the back of his hand. As he reaches down and just says, oh, nice. I really wanted to slice something too. As a woman walks up behind this guy and says, hey, Kodagiri, don't go walking around carrying the enchanted blade like that. It's making me so nervous just looking at you, right? As we see that this woman, as she raises her hand to point over at, of course, this Hishaku member whose name is Kurogiri, she also has the flame symbol. But yes, this is another Hishaku member who we do not get a name for in this chapter, which is like, come on now, right? But Kugiri just sort of like turns around and looks over to presumably his partner here and just is like, hey, but I need to deepen my understanding on it. But hey, what are you talking about? Like, I need to deepen my understanding of it in preparation for when I can use this blade, right? And he says like, hey, Sojo said it was very important, right? And his partner just is like, hey, and you actually feel that happening, as Kugiri just is like, hey, no, not now. It's currently contracted to someone else, so my love is still unrequited, right? As we see that she's just like, oh, gross, like, hey, Yura sent a message out to each team saying, hey, it's almost time. And Kugiri just is like, huh, well, thanks to Hirohiko, this is going to be a massive hassle. Like, his tactics and kills are so half-assed. Like, Yura spoils that kid way too much. As Kugiri's partner just is like, hey, don't talk about it like that. Yura and those guys are constrained right now. Hirohiko's in rehab, and he can't even touch the enchanted blade. And we see Kugiri's like, oh no, poor thing. As we see an image of Hirohiko in this moment, who is currently sitting in a black wife beater, who has both of their arms now reattached, which is a very good thing, all things considered. And we see that Hirohiko is currently folding a bunch of paper cranes, even though Hirohiko will not be able to use them because, well, yeah, their sorcery is sort of gone in this moment, but either way, Hirohiko's like still trying to fold these paper cranes, or origami cranes, right? But we sort of just get a full face shot on Kugiri's face now, because he's just like, hey, well, at least we get to kill. It has been a very long while, right? As we see that his partner just is like, hey, I mean, are you excited? Our job this time around is actually to kidnap a kid. It should be so much fun, right? As we see Kugiri's like, okay, that's fun, but like, where is the target? And she's like, oh, I actually have no idea. And Kagura's like, what are you talking about? And his partner just is like, hey, according to Yura, she currently cannot be found. And Kagura's just like, oh, so it's a gamble that's so very risky. Hirohiko's just like Yura, aren't they, right? And we see that his partner says like, yeah, he also said that if we wait, they will reveal the goods. As we cut to the final page of the chapter, where we enter into a schoolroom where we see a girl is sitting at a desk taking a bunch of various notes, as of course we understand this is Samura's daughter. It's the actually same silhouette we saw earlier in this chapter, so of course this is Samura's daughter. Here we see, and we see up in the sky the owl face looking down into the window of the school building. Granted, I think it's like one of those paintings, like, where you look at it, no matter where you look from it, it looks like it's looking straight at you. So the owl face is just like there to say like, hey, the owl is sort of watching down on everything, and at this moment it is also watching down on Samura's daughter. And with this sort of reveal, this is where we end off this chapter of Kagurabachi. Of course, chapter number 61. Now, there's actually a lot to really go through and unpack in this chapter, mainly the whole idea of, okay, Samura's daughter is supposedly dead. And how did she get that way? Of course, it seems like, of course, the Masumi, being that they're a ninja clan, would probably be able to come up with, like, a fake body that seemed like the real enough thing. But really, I don't think it's all done to that. I mean, the whole mention earlier of this chapter is like, hey, the way that Samura distances himself from people is death. It really makes me wonder if there's more to Samura's abilities, and like, if for some reason he has an ability that could still stay around after his enchanted blade that had to deal with death, or if the enchanted blade really just takes the form of its user in this way. I mean, it's a very interesting question of, how do the enchanted blades actually work? Is their power always the same exact thing? Or is it the person who wields the power who melds it to them? Or at least that's how the first user of an enchanted blade is. And once that's sort of imprinted on the blade, it stays with all of those various abilities. It's just a big question that we really don't have the answer to, is how these enchanted blades really work from the get-go. And if Samura, for some reason, had a power to distance himself by people for death from the beginning. Very interesting there. And also, I'm sure the Masumi may have done something to it. I mean, they what does Scarlet say? Hey, during our service to Mr. Samura, he only used this as ninja once, and that was to fake her death. So, presumably she didn't actually die in this way, but still, it just makes me wonder what was Samura's sorcery before all this happened. The other major thing I wanted to point on is at the very end of this chapter, whenever we get really introduced to Kagurabachi and, of course, his female partner, how she says, like, hey, Yura sent out a message to each team. Which means that inside the Hishaku, all of these members were broken up into various teams. Of course, as we sort of see this, we of course see Kugiri and his partner here. But we also know that whenever Hirohiko works, they normally work with the best genist-looking Hishaku character, who I've just been calling Talo because he's got a very tall neck, supposedly, right? Which would also make sense that with the how many members of that? That's 4 of them, and then we, of course, have Yura, and then the bowler hat guy, let me actually go to Kagurabachi Wiki. They may have the whole thing on the Hishaku. Oh, yeah, here we are. Yeah, we see, of course, Yura's the leader. We have bowler hat guy. We have this female Hishaku sorcerer, and then, yeah, Talo, or the long neck dude, Hirohiko Kugiri, and, of course, Kugiri's partner. So we have, really, right now, 4 unseen Hishaku members. Now, we still don't know 3 of their names, but 4 of them, we don't really have any idea what they look like whatsoever. So, sort of, I like the idea, like, all of the, Hishaku are sort of paired up into teams or 2, or maybe there is, like, a team of, 3 or something, like, since Yura doesn't need anybody companions with him, being that Yura is his own guy. So we really don't know a bunch of this situation, but I do like this whole idea of, like, in the future, whenever we get introduced to more Hishaku members, they may all be, like, grouped in together with each other and have these, like, divided labor forces almost, right? And then the whole idea of, okay, this next battle is going to be occurring in a school of some sort, like, I was making a joke at the beginning about, like, how the name of the night battle doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for the name of this chapter. Like, if anything, it should be called, like, The Daughter or something like that, but whatever. Whenever a battle eventually ensues here in Kagurabachi, being this is a Shonen Jump battle manga, for Christ's sake, so, we will be getting some battles at some point in this arc. It'll be cool to see, like, a little bit of a school thing, like, how's this going to go down? Is, Kugiri and Chihiro going to actually infiltrate the school to make contact with Samura's daughter, who is currently unnamed? Hopefully she gets a name next chapter. That'd be actually really, really dope, but, like, how is this really going to work here? I'll be interested to see what that happens. But really just a fun chapter of Kagurabachi going through. Again, I really love the, cover page at the beginning with the 3 enchanted blades that are very relevant right now. Of course, the Kumeyori, Tobimune, and Inten. And also, the question is, what enchanted blade does Kugiri currently have? Because we see it's just wrapped up in some paper, but we don't see any, like, discerning objects of the thing. Like, we know Cloud Gouger is destroyed. Can't be that. The Magatsumi is currently in the possession, or the Shidochi is currently in the possession of the Kabunagi. Inten is, of course, with Chihiro, and the Tobimune is with Samura. The only other blade we currently know of is the Kumeyori, which it doesn't seem like Kugiri would have it, because that's Hirohiko's blade, being that they are the one who is contracted to it. So is that actually one of the other 2 blades? One, of course, one who belongs to Subaru, or the other one who belongs to the other girl. We really have no idea whatsoever, so I'll be interested to see whenever the enchanted blade battle actually happens here, what Kugiri's blade actually is. If it ends up being he's able to use the power of the enchanted blade, if not, he's just swinging around the enchanted blade as just a simple blade. But yeah, that's all there. Like, we're going to Kyoto next, and really, I'll just be happy to see where this arc starts to take us in this sort of, like, infiltration kidnap arc to get Samura's daughter back. It's gonna be pretty fun. But yeah, with that, thank you guys so very much for watching this video on Kagurabachi, chapter number 61, of course, like I mentioned earlier, titled Night Battle. And if you enjoyed this video, I've got plenty of other Kagurabachi chapter reviews on the channel. I mean, at this point, I've done, like, at least 17 of these if my math is serving me right, and it also could be serving me wrong, but it is what it is there, so go check out all of those videos. There'll be not only a playlist in the description, but an end card on this video. And also, you can just go to my channel and browse for all my other YouTube content, which is normally anime and manga related. I also have a gaming channel and a TCG channel that don't really get uploaded on too much, but I'm going to try to change that with like a video a week on the gaming channel and like a video like once every 2 weeks to a month on the TCG channel. But don't worry, my anime and manga content is not going anywhere. But yeah, with that, thank you guys so very much for watching my video on Kagurabachi chapter number 61. And yeah, this is a good chapter of this series that I really love, and I hope you guys are enjoying too. And I'll catch you guys next time for Kagurabachi chapter number 62. So, thank you guys all for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks, Bachi Bros. This will be Glowplasma 231, signing out.